My name is Allie, and I'm from Denver, Colorado, and I'm a student here at Point Park, a dance major, as well as a digital marketing minor, and I am 20 years old. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic and life-threatening disease that affects the entire body, but it mainly affects the digestive system, the pancreas, and the lungs. And so what happens with CF is there is not a good enough balance of salt and water in our cells. And because of that, our mucus is incredibly sticky, and this mucus surrounds all of our organs, including our lungs. In our lungs, it clogs certain areas, so it's harder to breathe. Our pancreas, it's very hard to release insulin. Our digestive system, it clogs certain parts, so we can't release enzymes and digest our food naturally, and it affects pretty much the entire body. I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis when I was 2 weeks old. And at my diagnosis, the doctors told my family I had a 50% chance of surviving childhood, and I most likely wouldn't excel in any sport when I was older, let alone play one, because I wouldn't have the strength. And so growing up with CF was incredibly hard. It affects everyone differently. So for me personally, it really affected me with my weight, with my fatigue, and with my digestive system. And my lungs were incredibly healthy. And so I started dancing when I was 3 years old, and my parents put me into dance just kind of to get me active, to get me into some sort of sport. They put me into a lot of different sports, but dance was the one that really clicked. And I've been dancing ever since then. And there was a point in my lower teens when the doctor suggested I quit dance because my health was getting kind of bad. I've always been a pretty healthy kid, so growing up, it was hard, and I mainly struggled with my weight and with keeping my salt levels up, because that is a huge part of CF and really isn't talked about as much. And so once I hit my lower teens, I started to lose weight. This was before I hit puberty. And it was very hard to keep up fats and stuff like that in my meals, food, etc. And so the doctor suggested I quit dance. And that was the very first time I ever heard of a person doubting the fact that I could make this career happen. With this disease. It was the very first time, because everyone at that point in my life had been encouraging me and wanting to see me succeed with CF. That was the first time I ever even heard that. And so the doctor suggested I quit, and luckily my parents kept me in dance, because dance also, although it makes it a lot harder, it helped keep my lungs healthier. It helped keep me mentally stable and healthy, like exercise does for everyone. And so at that point, I decided that I wanted to make dance happen despite CF, and the doctors doubting me doing it is really what fueled my fire when it came to that. When I was diagnosed, the doctors do a standard test on everybody, just to test for a bunch of different things. And so I tested positive for 3 things. I'm not sure what the other 2 were, but one of them was CF. And so this is one test that they do at birth that allows someone to determine if they have CF or not. And so they weren't sure if it was a false positive, because you can get a lot of false positives when you are tested for these types of things as a newborn. And so I came back and did another test, and they figured out that I actually had CF. And they also wanted to look further into it because I was eating a lot, but I wasn't gaining a lot of weight. And so they just wanted to look further into that. And so another way a person can get diagnosed with CF is through a sweat test. And so what they do is they use a gel that draws up sweat in a baby, and they measure how much sodium is lost in that sweat. And with CF, there's certain numbers, I'm not sure what the certain numbers are, but if you have CF, you lose a lot more sodium and a lot more salt than a person without CF does. And so that's how they test it. And then they can also look in your gene mutation and see, because in order for you to have CF, both of your parents have to be a carrier. And so you can also go throughout your DNA and your history and your gene mutation and see if you have it through that as well. So there are a lot of different treatments and things that help keep us healthy with CF. And so one of them are airway clearances. And so for me, what I use is a nebulizer, which is just like a little plastic cup that uses medicine, and it's attached to a machine that blows air, so it vaporizes that medicine, and I breathe it in for 5 minutes. Most people with CF do this, but you breathe the medicine in for 5 minutes. And so that first part of the treatment is meant to kind of start loosening the mucus and getting it to more of like a liquidy consistency in the lungs. And then we usually have a vest, and that vest is just an airway clearance machine that pumps your upper body, and so it can help release the mucus, and you can hopefully cough it up and get it out of the lungs, because the more it's cooped up in there and the more it's getting and building and growing bigger is not good. So the purpose of the airway clearance is to loosen up the mucus and to chop it up and try to get it out of there so you can then spit it out and get it out of your lungs, and then it's easier to breathe. And depending on what your lung function is, some do them daily, some do them 2 to 3 times a day, some may be able to do them once a week. It really just depends. And with recent medicine, a lot of CFers have been able to minimize the amount of time they spend doing airway clearance, which is incredible. And before those airway clearances are done, I take albuterol, which is just a little medicine that opens up my lungs, so it allows the nebulizer and the vest to be a lot more effective, and an airway clearance. And then another treatment is we take a lot of pills. And so because our digestive system cannot naturally digest our food, we have to take oral enzymes. And so depending on a person's ability to digest, really, some take a lot of enzymes, some take a lower dose, I take a lot. And you just take a certain amount with everything you eat, mainly fats, because we cannot mainly digest fats. And so we just take that with every food so we can actually digest. And we also have a lot of nutrition and vitamin deficiencies. So we tend to up vitamin B, vitamin D. We have lots of multivitamins just to make sure we can really keep those in good supply within our body. And then that will directly affect energy right there. And then a lot of us also take salt tablets and electrolyte drinks because of the amount of sodium we lose in our sweat, so we have to really keep that sodium building up and keep the levels steady, or otherwise we're gonna fatigue out super quickly. That drinking enough water is very important, of course for every human, but especially for others with CF, because we lose so much salt and we're taking in so much salt, it's really important to balance those out as best as possible. And then many, because it's hard to gain weight and to maintain weight, a lot of CFers have a feeding tube, just because it's very easy to access your stomach through that way and to get as much food and fats into a body. And then once you take those enzymes, then we can finally digest it and gain weight from there. I've been incredibly fortunate to have done a lot of stuff because I have cystic fibrosis. And one of those is working with Colton Underwood, who started the Legacy Foundation in support of one of his family members who has CF. And so at one point, this was before I really knew him, he was doing a trial and program where he worked with Afflovest, which is a company that supplies a very advanced version of the vest and is a very advanced version of airway clearance. And they were working on giving one to a person in every state that has cystic fibrosis. And so in Colorado, he was having people submit, lots of people with cystic fibrosis, and he was gonna choose which recipient he wanted to give it to in Colorado. And I was fortunate enough for one of my friend's moms to actually submit me for it. And so what he did is he called me in for an interview. And so I interviewed with him and my mother, just talking about my story, about my life with CF, etc., and my mindset with it. And it's funny because he told us that I was being pulled in to help decide who was going to be the CF recipient of the vest. I never even thought I was in the draw board to even potentially receive it. And so we did the interview and then took some pictures, and then he led me out into a room and said we were going to continue the interview there. And what he did was he actually surprised me with the vest. And so this life-changing treatment has helped me so incredibly much, because the other vest I had before Colton was attached to a big machine in the wall, super loud, and took a lot longer. Whereas the one that he gave me took a lot less time to do, is super quiet, so I can actually talk during it, and it's portable. So I can clean my room while doing my treatments, which is so efficient. And so that was the very first time I even met him and got to work with him. And from there on, I've been able to do a lot of photo shoots with him and his foundation. We did one at my dance studio back in Colorado wearing the vest, and so we just use these photos to promote CF and to raise awareness for it, both on his website and just on social media in general. I've also been fortunate enough to share my story at a lot of the events Colton has put on to raise money for cystic fibrosis in his foundation, and they're usually sponsored by Autoglass. And so whether it's golf or shooting clay with guns, those clay pallets, it's usually sports inspired, and so I've gotten to share my story and meet a big group of different people that support the foundation, which is so incredible. And I have also appeared on The Bachelorette, because after that very first meeting I had with him when he surprised me with the vest, he actually flew straight to The Bachelorette and was a contestant on it. They wanted to kind of show his background with cystic fibrosis and how he's helped so many people in this group with this disease. And so I got to meet Becca Krufrin, who at that point he was dating because she was the bachelorette. And so she came to Colorado. It was Hometowns Week, and we went to the hospital that have been going to since I was young. And we filmed this whole entire thing where I got to ask them both questions on TV. I got to teach them a little dance, which is like the most basic 8-count piece ever, because they both could not dance. And it was a great way to share awareness and to raise money for CF, to be on The Bachelorette. However, it didn't necessarily appear on the show, but I got to be on TV in the bloopers part because he said AffleVest too many times, and that it kind of ruined it from appearing on TV. I've also done a lot of work with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. I volunteered with them in one of their concept videos they were doing to kind of show how people with CF can live a normal life. And they gathered just a bunch of different CFers from different parts of the world and filmed certain parts of their life, whether that was a kid with CF or a parent with CF or a person in high school with CF. I was the girl in high school. And in this video, we dressed up for prom and kind of showed that, you know, me as a person with cystic fibrosis can live a normal life and enjoy life despite having this disease and despite having to really fight it. And so I was able to appear in that with a lot of different CFers and to show that I can live a life that I'm proud of despite my disease. And I also got a wish from Make-A-Wish because of cystic fibrosis. And I'm so incredibly fortunate that my parents allowed me to wait and to the very, very last minute. What happens is once you hit a certain age, you can't use your wish anymore. You have to use it within your first 18 years, I believe. And so right before my 19th birthday, I was able to use my wish, which was incredible. And what we did is my wish was to actually go on Broadway in London. So originally I was like, I'm gonna make this wish as big as possible because this has to be something that my parents can't buy me necessarily. And so I was like, well, my parents cannot buy me a show in London on Broadway. And so we talked to the wish coordinators and they're like, okay, so we kind of have to keep it in the country. We can't go out of the country, out of America. So I was like, okay, my goal was to be on Broadway in New York. And so what they did is they contacted different theaters in New York, and it didn't end up working out just because it was kind of hard to support having a Make-A-Wish kid come into those big shows. However, they did get into contact with regional theaters throughout the country. And what happened was they got into contact with Arena Stage, who is placed in Washington, D.C. And they were doing the off-Broadway production of Newsies, Disney's Newsies. And so they were like, yeah, you can come in and we'll host this entire Make-A-Wish trip for you during the show. And so what happened was they had me fly out with my entire family, my parents and my sister, all the way to Washington, D.C. And we stayed in this little condo apartment, the same apartment that all of the dancers from the show were staying in. And the very first day we got there, I was able to tour the theater. I looked at all the backstage parts, which was perfect because I got to see how an off-Broadway production runs behind the scenes of the show, which was incredible. And so from the minute I got there, I was on the stage, looking around, looking backstage, looking at the props, and I was able to look at all the behind the scenes part of the production. And then I had a costume fitting, and because I was going to be on stage, I had to be in costume, so I got to have a costume fitting with the production team and the costume fitters. And so they fitted me into my own little costume, and I was ready. And I got to meet the entire cast and ask them a bunch of questions about the show, about auditioning, about the industry, etc. And then the next day, I was able to appear in the show after I learned the choreo from the captain. And so he taught me choreo, and then I was able to go into the show and perform with the dancers, which was incredible. I will forever remember that moment. This one specific moment on stage when I got to be kind of in the center with the cast too, and they were all looking at me. It was probably one of the best moments of my life, and so I'll remember that forever. So after college, my biggest goal ever is to become a professional dancer, despite my disease. And so I want to move to New York directly after school, and my goal is to be on Broadway. And I will be in any Broadway show ever, but my main goals, my main favorites are Hamilton, Chicago, and Wicked, and Cats. And so I would love to be in those Broadway shows, and Moulin Rouge as well. And I also would love to be a Rockette. This summer I took precision jazz for my very first time, and growing up I thought being a Rockette was incredible. It was really cool. Performing at Radio City seemed incredible, but it was never really a dream of mine until this summer. And now being a Rockette is one of my biggest dreams and goals as well. And I also, besides those two, I would love to do anything dance-wise when it comes to film, when it comes to concept videos, when it comes to touring with an artist. I would love to do any of that, plus cruise ships as well too. So my goal truly is to mainly do those two and do as much as I can possible with dance. So one of my favorite quotes is, "Death is inevitable, but living a life you are proud of is something that you can control." And that is by Claire Wineland, who had cystic fibrosis, and she recently passed away after getting a double lung transplant. And that is my favorite quote because I believe that that is something that everyone should live by, and it is something that is now my mission. And I truly believe, whether it's cystic fibrosis or whatever circumstance someone is going through, you can live a life you're proud of despite what you are fighting, despite the demons you're fighting, despite circumstances, despite certain health issues, anything. I believe you can live a life that you're proud of and fight for that despite anything else. And so my goal was to show others that you do not have to be a victim of your circumstances. And I truly believe that whatever you're going through was given to you or assigned to you because you are strong enough to fight through it and to live your life with it and to inspire others while having it. And so I just want to encourage anyone and everyone that living a life you are proud of is completely in your control, and you can do whatever you want to do despite what you are struggling with, yes. Maybe I'll say
really fancy way of saying everything happens for a reason.
Yep, pretty much, honestly. Not my goal necessarily.